So, Zohara, I'd like to start this out. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, because one of the things that impressed my wife and I both reading your book was the amount of commitment that it has taken, basically a lifetime, to delve into all of these varied. I mean, I have a whole list of things here I want to talk to you about, just to try to keep myself on track.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, usually I have a list to remind myself what to talk about, but with you, it's a list to try to sort of keep myself focused, because your book covers so much territory. And just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've done a lot of different things in my life. You know, many people, when they're young, they know when they're young what they want to be when they grow up. And some of us want to be a lot of things, or some of us become things we never thought of. So while as a youngster I thought I might become a veterinarian, and then went and did a day at a vet's place when I was about 9, and a cat came in and it was all bloody. That was the end of my veterinarian business.
Right.
What I did keep from childhood is this unadulterated love of nature and of animals and of sort of the whole living kingdom. So part of my life is really, the backdrop is in nature and in the natural world, and as a commitment as an activist from the age of 14 onwards. So for many decades, I've been involved in a variety of different environmental matters, in particular, whether it's animal rights or biodynamic farming or the cessation of GMOs or the stopping of, deadly enterprises such as pesticides and fungicides and insecticides. And I think, when I was younger and you start out in this work, you really believe you're going to make a profound change. And I found that one of the big changes you make as an activist is within yourself, in part because there's so few successes. We would make progress in one area or a state or a county, and then the following year it would be undone with some new pesticide, some new poison. And so I learned from my work very early on when I was 14 and handed out pamphlets for Ralph Nader at a Baltimore rally, actually a talk he gave back then in the 60s. And I have been working as an activist ever since in many fields, also in the issue of GMOs I mentioned, and the issue of social justice, the issue of a life economy, which we'll talk about later. But during all these years, in addition to being an activist, I've added different careers as I've gone along. For 10 years, I was in the performing arts in my 20s. So I was a mime and a singer-songwriter. I did a lot of different kinds of arts, and I did sculpture and painting, and found that through the arts I could probably do a lot of self-healing. But I found that word itself, the written word, the spoken word, ultimately became a good part of my career later on. So after a year of the performing arts, I did a year of the healing arts and founded one of the oldest holistic healing centers in America. It's here in Baltimore. It's called the Ruscombe Mansion Community Health Center. And I founded it as a result of my own journey with illness, with Crohn's disease, and recovering from surgery, and finding that acupuncture, homeopathy, chiropractic were sort of the cornerstone of my recovery. And from that, I sort of branched out and researched, studied, and then gathered together in a collective forum 30-some different providers. So almost 30 years later, we're still providing all these wonderful, natural, holistic therapeutics for children and adults and adolescents, and it's a beautiful center. So I did that for 10 years, and then I went into the broadcast arts, the communication arts. I worked in newspaper, I worked in television and radio, all at the same time for 10 years. And it was, I joke to people, when you give an activist a microphone, I was like a fuming volcano, and I have no idea how people listen to the first year of my 10-year stint as a daily broadcaster. So for 10 years, I had a show called The Zoe Show, and I covered everything from foreign affairs with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to very local issues of stream pollution or something having to do with general body politic. And during that time period, I became a registered libertarian after focusing on body politic for the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, and then the Clinton administration, and then part of the Bush administration again. I found that my allegiance was really to the libertarian principles of a very liberal social milieu and a very conservative fiscal one, because I learned, relative to the Constitution, which I focused a decade on during that time period, which is a beautifully designed document of relationship that we don't follow and that we haven't for a very long time. But when I was involved looking through the lens, as a libertarian would, at the constitutional framework, I found that the majority of things we do in this country called law enforcement are not law enforcement, it's fiat law, ratified by case law. And the truth I learned was anything that doesn't do injury to another person or their property, technically, is as if no law has been broken. And when I learned that that was the power as a citizen of jury nullification, that the juror is actually the judge of the case and the law, and judges won't tell you that, but our obligation is to make sure the law being applied to the case is itself constitutional. So if somebody's brought before a citizen juror who is being prosecuted for prostitution, the truth is prostitution, while you might not like it or find it immoral or something or other, the truth is constitutionally a person has a right to do with their body what they choose. So there were a lot of things that I got into during that decade, and then I found after my 10 years of being on daily radio and in newspaper and doing kind of television commentary and radio commentary, and it was a very hard 10 years, I really sort of left with a broken heart, which was very good. You sort of break apart without falling apart. Right. And I spent 10 years studying Kabbalah, which is something I had studied on and off since I was 14 and always had an interest in the deeper mystery teachings within the Judaic path, which I was born into but sort of left when I was much younger, and went and did the 10,000 things and felt a kinship with all First Peoples' tribal relationship to the earth and their philosophy as well as their practical theology and action, which is reverence. So I'd say I'm a naturalist, a humanist, a spiritualist, and in you put all those things together, and what it tells you is you're responsible for your own behavior. And I think that's why I spent 10 years studying the Tree of Life and understanding what self-refinement and self-management is about, because that's what the Hebrew tabernacle tradition and the Tree of Life tradition in Judaism actually teaches.
So that's all you've been doing?
And in the meantime, raised a family. Man. And all grown children now, and I have many dogs, and we have an organic farm that we plant every spring and summer. And
yeah, this is what I mean about my wife and I admire your tenacity and your commitment to what you've been doing. I mean, this is a fulfilled lifetime. Isn't it amazing, all of the things that you said that you've partaken in? It's all of those things accumulating together to bring you even to this point in time in your life, my life, what's happening on the planet. As I look back in my life, I notice that the things that were seemingly irrelevant at the time and insignificant became tiny little nudges that nudged my life a direction to where today it made a profound difference. So in that light, I really pay attention to the little nudges I get today, the little things that people say, the little things that make me see the world slightly different, because I know over time that's going to take me down a path that could be a profound change in myself and the world around me.
One of the things I talk about in my book, The Future of Human Experience, which is why you first invited me to join you today, is very focused on the subject of consciousness and what Larry Dossey's beautiful new book called One Mind explores. And that's really, I think, essentially where everybody has come who's been involved in this work for several decades of the new paradigm, which says basically that we are one and that our consciousness is one, and that your thoughts affect my thoughts and your feelings affect somebody else's feelings around the world, and somebody else's hardship affects us. And even without seeing it on the news or knowing of it consciously, we are all in this life field together. So when you finally reach that awareness and understanding and appreciation of both the beautiful options we each have, as well as the truly serious responsibility we each have to be masters of ourselves, and to be able to some degree to at least control our actions. That's the easiest one to control. And then to be master over our words. That's another one that's easier than the last one, which is the primary long-term spiritual path of every human, in evolutionary terms, which is even the mastery of our thoughts. So when we become masters of our minds and not just subject to them, we have the ability to be a very deliberate, conscious co-creator. And in the meantime, while we're all getting there, we can be conscious co-creators by becoming aware of why we do what we do, whether it's how we make our meal or share it with someone, or how we talk to a world leader about some troubling aspect going on in current events. It's magnitudes that are different, but not basically the relationship. And so what I discovered after all these years of covering so many different fields, from UFOs to robotics to artificial intelligence to, artifacts in our own kind of history of matrices that show a relationship between all sacred societies, when we still use the Galactic Center and the Orion star system, which is over the Great Pyramids at the Giza Plateau in Egypt.
And this is what happened in, 1851?
Well, it was in the 1600s when the mariners at sea were having trouble finding out where they were in time and longitude. So they came up with a methodology of using a meridian marker, a central main meridian. And it used to be, for so many millennium, the star system, the Orion star system over the Giza Plateau. So whether it was Stonehenge or some sacred site underground in a kiva or something somewhere else in the world, all sacred sites, meaning the methodology and the relationship patterning that humanity used for their sacred sites, were all related to one another because they sought relevance in the zodiac and in the galaxy. So when we no longer use the Greenwich Meridian and the Royal Observatory and the when we didn't observe the Giza Meridian and it moved to the Greenwich Meridian in the 1600s and later 17 and 1800s formalized, we really, I feel like we got unhinged as a civilization from appreciating the connectedness between us all and the connectedness between all ancient sites, whether it's, the Snake Mounds or the Nazca Plains or even places on Mars, surfaces on Mars are related through the system. So we unhinged ourselves really from the cosmic man. And when you look to any sacred society, they always use the basic Hermetic axiom that's used in the Western path: as above, so below, as within, so without. And when a society unhinges it from as above, then where are we below? We're lost. So I think that change was monumental in terms of shifting society away from a celestial relationship between ourselves and the sky and travelers and extraterrestrials and perhaps our own past and own future in that sense as cosmic dwellers. And we became sort of manipulators of matter. So we'll decide where the main meridian marker is, unassociated altogether with the zodiac and the galaxy we sit in. And then another thing was the loss really of the solstice and equinox system of regulating time, which the church profoundly altered with the Gregorian calendar, saying that January is somehow the start of the new year, which makes no sense to anything other than the theology of the church's political power. So that was another big change. So I think, as Jose Arguelles argued for many years before he passed on, was for our societies in the world to return to a lunar calendar, because then it puts us in touch with the pulse, the actual pulse within our body, the pulse that we're aligned with on the earth, and the pulse that we're aligned with in our celestial heavens. So by losing our timekeeper, our relationship to the lunar cycles, and our relationship to the celestial marker of the galactic center, we became unhinged. And as we became unhinged, we also became tremendously aggressive towards the earth and tremendously aggressive with technology and iron. We moved out of the Iron Age into this technological kind of, I call it techno-barbarism, but we don't always use the technologies we have for the elevation of society. Often, as we see in the war machinery worldwide, it's used to dominate and exploit. So this is all coming to a close, whether we like it or not, and that's what the book, The Future of Human Experience, addresses, is that we are having a change in consciousness, and humanity as a whole is becoming mightily aware that we are one, and that the injustices on the material level of nations having food, medicine, technology, bathrooms, etc., and others having barely even subsistence food or water, that this is going to change as well. So I think as humanity wakes up, a lot of the things we all have worked for and that don't seem very far along. I mean, I think most of us starting in the 60s and 70s felt that by now we'd be a solartopia, as Harvey Wasserman calls it, and he's still diligently working against nuclear power, nuclear energy, and the serious problem we have right now in Japan at the Fukushima plants, where these amazing fuel rods are hanging over the waters and it's leaking into the Pacific Ocean, and our own USDA stopped testing mammals, fish, etc., because they were all having elements of cesium-137. I think it was 137 or 136, and that tells
they even raised the safe level of radiation on their scale. You know, that whole situation. This is what you would call your wild card. You know, this could be. I was listening to David Suzuki and Michio Kaku both, and they're both saying that this is very serious. And the best case scenarios, unless we come up, and I think this is where it gets into what Einstein said, we're never going to come up with solutions from the same level of awareness that created the problems.
Right.
This is why I think nature, our spirit, everything is forcing us more into our heart energy and pulling ourselves into coherence, like with heart math, what they talk about. Because the solutions that we're seeking are not going to come from the level that created these problems. We'll just make them worse. That's why.
It's very interesting, you know, when you think about it from a spiritual level of Japan, who were subject to the nuclear bombs, you know, of Hiroshima. And I think it's very interesting that to no design of their own, they are currently poised to exterminate the world, not all dead at once, but to contaminate the world with nuclear radiation. And I think that that's an interesting kind of blowback, if you were, because it's not like they've declared war, but we have no sensibility anymore about shared resource, and that the oceans are a shared resource, and it has nothing to do with TEPCO or the private corporation in Japan or the Japanese government. And that's why Harvey Wasserman and others at www.nonukes.org have been urging people to sign petitions to the UN that this become an international, global issue using international and global talent. And so I think that that's exactly right. What you said is that the silver lining of Earth changes is it's going to bring humanity together. That's what I believe. I used to say that when I was a political commentator, that the silver lining of terrorism is that it would bring the world together. They're rantings on different levels and different octaves, and they've come out of a different kind of loss of connectedness to the earth and connectedness to life, and the non-valuing of how precious life is, every breath of it. So my book, The Future of Human Experience, addresses really the body of the world, the mind of the world, and the soul of the world through the human experience. So the body of the world would be these environmental issues, or biodynamic farming, or something called sonic bloom, which uses the frequency of a songbird played out in music or just frequency itself over fields, and it helps the plants grow faster because it opens up the stomata of the plant, which means its sugar uptake is greater. And Dan Carlson, who discovered this, did so after being a Korean war vet and after seeing the kind of starvation, and he came back and said he never wanted to see that anywhere in the world, and so it motivated him to find out how we can prevent malnourishment and topsoil destruction and have more nutritious and more bountiful crop. And so I think that these changes that all of us are going through together are not just outside in the world. Earth changes aren't just outside, they're also within, as you point out. And all of us are asked to try to come to a better sensibility about the power we have in the decisions we make, like the food we eat. I mean, whoever would have guessed 25, 30 years ago when we started eating organic foods back in the late 60s, when we understood the difference? You don't think about those things until you really start to think about them, that they're spraying warfare defoliants and all kinds of poisons on the foods we eat. And no wonder there's epidemic cancer in children and adults and animals and all kinds of species. So when you start to see the connection between the choices you're making yourself, and that those choices can change the economy if enough of us demand it, so you can now go to a Giant chain or a Safeway chain. These are chains here in Maryland, food chains, or on the East Coast or nation, and they have an organic section. You don't have to just go to the small local health food stores anymore.
Yeah,
So
it's the same way here too. We've forced them by voting with our dollars
exactly.
to put in these organic sections now, and hopefully the labeling is correct. But we grow a little garden out back just to make sure, double sure, and it's good to just sort of feel the dirt and really feel the fun and the accomplishment of planting a seed and watching it grow. It's something that we're missing, as most of us in humanity are missing that.
Yeah, which I think is a sense of connectedness, not is between our hands and our heart and the earth, but also a connectedness in time, that we see the relevance of what we do, that everything has an after effect or an echo or a ripple, and in this case you plant the seed and it becomes a food that you eat. And so planting and growing food, and why it should be part of the school curriculum everywhere in the world, not only because it makes a human self-sustaining and able to take care of themselves better, but it also puts you in touch with the rhythm of the earth and the speed at which earth really is, rather than the speed at which our 24/7 lights on all the time life has made us believe it is, because our time scale is artificial relative to the true sun-up, sundown rhythm of our lives. One of the things in the book that I look at is what happens when we start grafting on artificial intelligence to an intelligence that isn't quite sophisticated. And what I mean by not sophisticated is, if we were really sophisticated, we would never do things that are dead enterprises. If we were a sophisticated humanity, we'd always be asking, now how can my science elevate humanity, not how can I kill the most people, or how can I destroy the most pests with the biggest poison, or we'd be asking a different set of questions with greater elegance. And I think that that's what so many of us believe we're on the precipice of. It's just, how down and dirty will it have to get before the silver lining comes shining through?
Yeah, and in a sense we have created almost an unconscious immoral being when we made corporations and set corporations out into the world with the agenda of a bottom line. It definitely is not working out, because I know I've heard a lot of corporate executives say that they would have not made those decisions as an individual, but by the corporate bylaws and rules and being responsible to the shareholders, those decisions had to be made in a certain way, and it was beyond the power of any one individual to change it.
Well, I think that's all changing now, and there's a better understanding in general that the corporation, our lives aren't here to serve the company, so to speak, meaning work or labor. We're supposed to live our lives, and that's just supposed to be part of our life. When an economy is no longer based on supporting life, but exploiting as much as you can from workers or from the earth or from the natural resources, we get into the predicament we're in now on this planet. So that's going to change. It's a question of, will it change soon enough to alleviate too much suffering, or will we go down with some horrendous suffering in order to transform? And that's another thing my book looks at, The Future of Human Experience, which Inner Traditions published. This is the third of my books they published. And what we look at is the cycle that we see throughout mankind's billion-year or so existence on the planet, which is that we seem like a life to have an inhale and an exhale, an incarnate part and a disincarnate part. So too with planets, nations, civilizations. And so in part of the book we look at the cyclical nature of civilizations rising and falling. And so in my book, The Future of Human Experience, we look at not just the catastrophism is part of our journey, but what kind of humanity are we during it and after it? Because I think that's really the question. The earth is not going to be destroyed. I don't feel that way anyway. Even if it were to become nuclear, the earth will continue, and it's got millions, if not billions of years ahead of it to support life in its own incarnational journey. Whether humanity will do so well on the earth, that's another challenge that people now, look to space exploration and space hybridization and maybe colonization as one of the great saving graces for humanity's gene pool in the long run. But I don't go that far because I think we have a different kind of responsibility, which is right in front of us right now. Sometimes we as a society with our intellect get so out there into the next 100, 200, 300, 400 years, and we forget about the people who don't have enough food to eat tonight. Right here in our own towns.
Yeah, I guess in a Kabbalistic sense, we're being definitely pushed from behind.
That is what they would say in Kabbalah. We either move forward from joy in our personal or collective lives, or we get pushed from behind and we change anyway. I love in the Hasidic tradition of which I'm a student, I love that they talk about concealed good and revealed good. Revealed good is when things are going along great. The economy's humming, you have a good job, you're feeling well, you're running, you feel, things are just terrific. We all know those periods don't always last that long, but when they do, make note. But there's a concealed good, which is when we stumble and fall, when we lose that job, when we might change a partnership, when we have illness. These are actually concealed goods, and the concealed good, meaning that good which is hidden in what we call or classify or experience because we've named it bad or negative, is just a different experience, and we're counseled to find the good in it because, truthfully, the concealed good is a greater good, meaning there's more opportunity for growth. So, I just spent a year of being pretty sick with something called hyperthyroid, and it sent my body so out of whack that I literally had to get off every board I was on. I had finished a third book. I didn't take up another one. I've really just sort of been resting and doing other things, and it's been a profoundly beneficial year.
Yeah, but good for you.
It's unlike any other year I've ever spent, which is always go, 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 do, and be of service. And this was really to re-examine at 60. So what kind of life do we have with the life of instability, which is really what's being asked of all of us, and how will we handle billions of people relocating simultaneously from shorelines all over the world? 16 of our 22 major cities are port cities. They're going to disappear over the next coming 100 years or so, 200 years, whatever it takes. And that's why looking back at past cycles of civilizations that were sunken or flooded or disappeared because there were fires all the day with solar flares or other events coming from the galactic core explosions that were affecting all the Earth. So there are a lot of things to learn from the ancient past. We're very short-sighted as Westerners, and that's the benefit sometimes of the Eastern traditions because they have a longer course of recalled history. And all of us, I think, have unfortunately been schooled out of appreciating how many billions of years humanity in the form we're currently in has been living, thriving, and disappearing on Earth and then reappearing again.
And this is really coming to light lately. Some of the recent finds that they've made, like in Turkey and Sarajevo, they're finding pyramids that are bigger than the Pyramid of Giza. And they're also noticing, and this is science, where they can actually take gauges and actually see what's going on. So it's slowly getting into the academic area now. But what they found is that there are two main frequencies between these pyramids that are separated by hundreds of miles, 3,000 miles. And one frequency is the frequency of the Earth, around 7, between 4 and 7. And this is alpha, this is the state that you want to be in physically for healing and things like that. But the other frequency is a real low frequency of the heart. And these are things that they're actually finding out now, that the pyramids, there's thousands of pyramids that were built by highly advanced civilizations. And it seems like they were built on ley lines and certain geometric patterns to create this harmonic balance on the Earth. And I think the more we can find out about that, and this is only going to happen if we get back in touch with our inner nature and have more respect for nature. This is the information that's coming from a higher level of consciousness as we tune into this. Because I was thinking the other day, I went to sleep thinking about Fukushima, and it's a problem. It could be an extinction level event if we're not careful. What is this meant to do for me? if I can't figure it out, I can't have an effect on it. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and the double slit experiment came to mind. And I thought to myself, okay, if how I look at a particle determines if it's a particle or a waveform, maybe collectively, if we start looking at the world more as a frequency waveform, we won't turn it into the hard stuff, the particles, the things that do genetic damage as much. And this is a level of consciousness. And the more I look into things like the holographic universe, and when you talk to scientists, they're all saying the same thing. This is much more like a holographic projection of consciousness than it is a manufactured reality on a matter level. And I think you and I are sort of on the same page as far as it seems like spirit at one time was spirit, but as it penetrates the fields of matter and space and time, it becomes more dense. And we've reached a point of density now to where it is a little dangerous with diseases and viruses, and you can fall and hurt yourself. But it seems like we've reached the bottom of that, and maybe it's that perception of seeing that, okay, we don't want to go any further and go completely unconscious. Like I noticed you interviewed Michael Cremo also. We don't want to keep devolving as a humanity. And maybe this is at the point to where we start rising up in consciousness. And I think this also falls in line with the Yugas and the Kabbalah thinking.
There's no question that at least all the traditions I've looked at, including those you just mentioned, speak to this time period, and it's not quite done. We're not totally cooked yet, as they would say. We need a couple more 100 years under our belt before en masse everybody rises. I mean, there's always front runners in every epoch of humanity, running up that light ladder. But as a humanity, from a Kabbalistic point of view, there are 10 Sephirot, and these balls of light represent fields of activity and powers and attributes, as well as being a replica of our own physical anatomy. And so we're in the age of Yesod, which is the generative organs, and it represents our covenant with the earth, with the spirit world, with the creator being. And the last age before all of humanity goes back up the ladder of light to becoming more of a light and material being, is the age of Malchut, which is our feet, or the earth, the sovereign being. It's also the woman, the moon. And so it tells us that in a couple hundred years, our intuition and women on the planet will be in great positions of leadership for the elevation of all of humanity. So we have a few hundred more years left of this coming down this ladder of incarnating into denser and denser matter, to remember that we are actually soul spirit beings having a material existence, and that what we're supposed to do with our material existence is elevate all matter and elevate it with our consciousness. See, I think that the human is a consciousness activator. We're sort of like a biodynamic capacitor, and we elevate both the light and matter. So we elevate the particle and the wave. And I believe it's through human consciousness becoming aware of something that physical form takes shape. And that would be a very quantum physics perspective. So by that token, as a co-creator from the vacuum of space into the thing we see, all of us are. We build buildings, we choose our clothing, we make meals. These are actions of creation. Well, actually, they're actions of formation. But it shows us that we have this capacity to shape matter. So if so, our day, by planning out our day, why not the whole world? And so if all of us are praying together every day for the water restoration of Fukushima, it has to have an effect, because we know already scientifically that prayer impacts anything its attention is put to. Meaning, we as humans, when we put our attention on anything, we change it. So we can change a rock, or we can change a weather pattern, or we can change somebody's health. And the interesting thing about some of the stories cataloged through the Spindrift Institute and others in my book, The Future of Human Experience, shows that when we pray a thy will be done, a wave prayer, back to your particle and wave, versus, if Aunt Martha broke her leg, may Aunt Martha's leg be healed, that would be a particle prayer. And what they found, the Klingbeils, who at the Spindrift Institute did this for a long time with mung beans and other living systems, they found that when a person prays for divine right order be restored, may the greatest heavenly balance or celestial well-being or whatever words you want to choose, but it's letting go of your own will or your own objective notion of what's best for anything or organism, a greater effect happened that was beneficial to the organism. So that's a big lesson for us. So perhaps if we pray for holy water, that Japan's water problem be solved, and that there be no contamination of the people, the earth, the sea, etc., that this will have an effect. And I think that that's kind of what humanity is coming into appreciating, is the power of collective prayer and the power of collective focus and the power of collective consciousness. There were some wonderful experiments at Pear up at Princeton when they were doing the anomalous laboratory studies of random events, and they had these generators that put out random numbers. And then they noticed that these random numbers became coherent and orderly when single events happened upon which everybody's consciousness was focused. So whether it's a massive tornado, or I remember one of the studies was of the death of Princess Diana, that all of a sudden all this randomness took on coherence. And what it tells us is that we are a coherent force as conscious humans. So conscious humans have a power that we haven't yet executed in the way that's most beneficial. We've used it so far to get the secrets of nature and then to use them in an exploitive fashion. But we haven't yet worked to get the secrets of nature in order to utilize them for the elevation of the most people and the nature systems themselves. And that's really the true art of science.
I was just recently talking to Lynn McTaggart about the random event generators, and one of the things that's interesting is it shows a difference before the event. Like before 9/11, there was a definite difference in the patterning of the random generating binary code. And heart math has also noticed that our heart senses events slightly before they happen. Like they've set people down in front of a screen with really negative and really positive pictures, and just before the negative or just before the positive, they have a slight difference if they're registering their heart of that picture that's going to come up negative. It's just slight. So this tells me that our mind really isn't even in touch with the reality of now. And I think the more we go into our heart, and actually I wrote a book called To Believe or Not to Believe, The Social and Neurological Consequences of Belief Systems. And I ended up rewriting it because the first writing was just a cathartic release when I started seeing all the things that religion and state have done to this planet and humanity and society and civil. It was just, so I rewrote it to make it a little more palatable,
User-friendly, as we say.
Yeah. The idea is to get it read, not my
get out a rant pen to rant through.
But one of the sections in there was about women of the world waking up and going into true positions, not just a token position of influence, but real positions of influence, because the women of the world waking up and the internet are the two things that these are the game changers to this whole downward spiral that we've been in. And I think the more that men can open up to their feminine aspect and bring in this energy in a balanced way, because I think it gets off balance. We overcompensate. I remember when I was learning how to ride a bicycle, it was very, very difficult because I was doing it with my mind and my body separate. I'd start falling to the left and my mind out of fear would jerk the bike to the right and to the left. I thought I would never learn how to ride, and I never would have at that level. But something kicked in. There was a magic moment between body and mind connection, and just all of a sudden, what was almost impossible before, standing up, became impossible not to do. And I was riding my bicycle thinking, wow, I can't fall now. There is something in me that has overridden my older levels of awareness, my body, and that disconnect has been brought together. And I think the same thing will happen if we have the faith, the courage, and the commitment to keep on. Like in the Middle East, they say, believe in Allah, but tie up your camel first. This is sort of where we are right now. We have to have our belief and our faith and our commitment to this. This is going to get better, but we also have to tie up our camel and watch the fuel rods also at the same time.
Well, it's interesting. I recently had a chance to talk with Matthew Fox and a gentleman named Adam Bucko, and they co-authored a book called Occupy Spirituality, in which they interviewed sort of the Occupy Wall Street movement generations in the 20s and 30s. And what they're talking about is really where we're at. It's a maturation of the sort of nonprofit service phenomena that blossomed in the 60s and has stayed vibrant throughout, saying that, politics is not just about party, it's about spiritual awareness, it's about choice. So whether there's a ballot issue about genetically modified organisms and the corporations dump millions in to override state will, you still have people standing up and saying, well, we'll see you next year. And I think the activism is the part that for some time in the quote-unquote meditative, transcendental, New Age kind of movement through the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, there was a refuge and a retreat in some way from the normative world for many people, and that's changing. I think everybody understands it's time to take action in the most reverent way we can, and with all generations working together, and with all persuasions of society working together, and all socioeconomics working together. And that's really sort of the model, and what you described about learning to ride a bike is really how all of society learns. They're front runners, and they'll do something, and it's very hard for the first group who did it. You look at the civil rights movement and how difficult it was. People lost their lives for it in the beginning, and now people are born, they incarnate, they have no idea what that struggle's like. And that's also something that I've noticed, is that many of us grew up with struggle, and we grew up with the desire for change. As a society, we all had Pluto and Leo, which was this dramatic need for change in structure, family structure, relationship structure, and whole generations are born under these big, enormous, zodiacal constellation effects. And right now the whole world is under a Pluto square Uranus, which is a tremendous time of change for institutions, for governments, for individuals. It happens suddenly. It affects everybody at once. It could be war, it could be meteorites, it could be a nuclear mishap. It can just be the way in which each one of us goes about our day on a single given day. So from my vantage point, and the reason I wrote The Future of Human Experience after 30 years of interviewing thousands of people, and then only being able to really talk about 100 or 20 or so of those thousands, was an effort to show that the challenges we face are not insurmountable. What's insurmountable is our avarice, our greed, our selfishness. And that bottom line for each one of us, and that's why I studied Kabbalah, was really to try to appreciate, so how do we go about shaping each of our own lives without waiting for divine awareness? Because I don't have divine awareness, but I have a divine longing. And so the awareness becomes of the divine in everything. I might not be running around with Buddhic consciousness knowing the answer to every question, but I have an open heart that's trying to intuit and feel and come into rapport with each thing, whether it's the mouse in my kitchen right now, or, all of the animals that just froze to death in fields out in the snap snowstorms in Montana. All of us, all creatures, all living beings, all living sentient life, all trees, all of us are in the same life field, and everything has some form of its own kind of awareness. So I got very interested in Gabe Bradshaw, and my book talks about transspecies psychology, and I talk about transspecies telepathy. I feel like the animal kingdoms are really reaching out and almost yelling us their code of ethic, and yelling to us their great long histories of storytelling. As a transspecies telepath, which I am, and I practice it, and I do it as a free service for certain people when they have need for whatever reason. I worked with some bonobos, and the matriarch of this tribe started telling me of the time of the land of the giants. And so we make a mistake to think that we're the only one with story, and we're the only one with awareness, and the only one who has need and family and culture and amusement and needs good food and needs rest and restoration. I mean, everything has its own needs and its own place. So,
I just recently opened up to what you're saying. Well, about 2 years ago, my wife and I published a magazine, the Lotus Guide, and we started a column about animal whispering, basically.
Oh, nice.
And we have local people that actually communicate through the emotional heart level to animals. And they've helped so many people with their animals. Animals have these traumas in their life, especially rescued ones. And she really helps.
I'd like to say the worst trauma are the ones that don't get rescued.
Yeah, that's for sure. And there's so many of them out there. But it's really important to be able to do that. And even with plants, some of my experience with ayahuasca down in South America put me in touch with the vegetable kingdom. And I realized, my gosh, there is consciousness in these plants, whether it's mushrooms or ayahuasca or whatever. And the whole planet is waiting for us to communicate with us, to talk with us, to show us a new way, a better way. While I'm thinking about it, I'm not exactly what you would call a traditional religious person, so it's sort of odd that I might say this, but I've been watching the new Pope, and it really seems like he's trying to point the religion in a better way. What do you think about it?
No, I would agree with you. I mean, from what he says, he's open-hearted, and he's open-minded, and he's intelligent, and he's alive with love. Our religions have become things of the head rather than agents of integration and agents of elevation, because the true purpose of religion is to lead each person to their own divine inner teacher, not to become dependent on a teacher, but to learn from a teacher how to use their own sacred inner voice and have that special relationship with deity and divinity. But I do agree with you, and I think it's wonderful for the Catholic tradition that a person of true love is holding this most important position of authority. And, hopefully we'll be able to open the heart back up of the beautiful wisdom teachings that are inside Catholicism, outside the politics.
Yeah, because especially the Catholic religion, because they're so big and so interconnected and unified, whether it's been in a right direction or wrong direction, they do have quite an organization, and they would be primary if we do have extraterrestrial contact for them to be a motivating, positive voice for a lot of the people on this planet. And I see them slowly, like Monsignor Balducci and people like this within the church have been opening up those gates. And recently the people that run the telescope down in Arizona, they've spoken out, and they've out and out said that they're looking for Nibiru and they're looking for extraterrestrials, and they're totally open for this. And I think because the church knows far more than we do about that history. In their archives, I'm sure they have all kinds of scrolls and documents. So they know that contact is inevitable at some point. And I see them positioning themselves, at least it appears like to me, that they're positioning themselves to be in that position.
I'm aware of the traditional folk knowledge of what they have and what they don't have and what they believe and what they don't believe, but I would like to say we have made contact. We've always had contact. We've never been without contact. It's just a question of what kind of contact is it that everyone's looking for. Are we waiting for a mass landing of ships? I think that's going to happen, and I think we'll see it in our lifetime. I believe that. I was a little child. I used to dream of it. And when we think about contact and you look to sacred societies, whether it's the Aborigines in the star system Sirius, or whether it's some other star system Pleiades that people believe in, I mean, there are traditions worldwide that today still honor their ancestry from another star system and say those are still their teachers to this day. And Nikola Tesla, by far the greatest inventor, scientist of the 20th century, and we'll see if he gets beat out in the 21st. I'm not so sure he will. He used to say that much of his information came from beings of Mars.
Right.
People thought that was funny, but now that we begin to really appreciate, there was once, as Rudolf Steiner so clearly made aware, that there was once a thriving civilization on Mars, and there have been different epochs on different planets, and right now we're on the Earth, some of us, and some humans are elsewhere. And I like Michael Cremo's work, which I include in the Future of Human Experience, because in looking at the Veda traditions, they can tell you that there's supposed to be, 4 million or so other human life-like planets in our galaxy.
Yeah, his book was recently adapted into academic studies, too.
Yeah. Well, he writes beautifully, and it's based in tradition. The nice thing about a lot of the new kind of esoterica coming about in terms of cryptozoology, hidden animals or hidden civilizations, is that they're done by researchers who really look in the ancient traditional writings and records. And I prefer that because you can channel anything, but what you channel isn't necessarily true and isn't necessarily pure. But when you look at what the elders took the time to write down and to record for future generations, I respect and appreciate that kind of scholarship, which is the kind of work I myself have always done. The Future of Human Experience, however, is not a scholarly work in the sense that it's not footnoted. Hallelujah. All my other books have like 600 footnotes. This has none. And it's because it's really taken from all the broadcast interviews with all these scholars. And so I'm quoting what they have said verbatim and then interwoven it so that what you get is these amazing journeys of amazing men and women who have really asked big questions and then attempted to make a difference in finding some answers that provoke new questions. And one of the things I learned as a broadcaster and as a dowser and as a humanist, I would say, is to ask the right questions, because the answer is in the question.
Right.
So the right question, whether we're trying to solve a problem for ourselves in our own life or the world, is important. And we have a culture yet that's always in such a hurry to rush to an answer, or to rush to a result, or rush to a product, that we don't always give ourselves the appropriate incubation time of, making sure that what does manifest is the highest good we're capable of.
So here's a question for you, and hopefully it's the right question. And I know this is a little difficult, but if you were to extrapolate out, it seems to me that we're going through a cycle. I think we can agree to that. And part of the cycle that we're in, there seems to be a window of opportunity here for us to be a conscious participant in our own evolution. It seems like consciousness has just been evolving, but now that evolution is taking on a consciousness of its own because we are participating in it. And where do you think this is going to end up? How do you think humanity is going to play out in this?
What timeline are you looking at? Are you looking tomorrow or in a couple million years?
I think we need to look at the next 50 years, because
I think we're headed for some really difficult times, because we have yet to come to reckon with reality. We still have people saying there's no such thing as global warming. And by the way, I am one of those who has talked about global warming being an intermediary before a glacial age for decades now, since the 1980s. So I don't think global warming's the end of the story. I think it's an interim reality. And we've pretty much shown that demineralization leads to a glacial age, because we need the minerals in order for life on Earth.
Right.
So I think we're in for very difficult times. It's like the old Rome. Here we are. We're going to inherit the ravages of greed, and that's good. It's not bad. It's like reckoning time. So I think all of humanity is moving into reckoning time. And it'll go on for a couple hundred years, where we will have massive movements of people, massive changes of land, changes in technology, changes in our values, changes in what questions we ask as a group of humans. We might go through a period of a world Inc., which we kind of see right now, where the corporation usurps even national power. I used to joke we'll have the Coca-Cola tank division. And when you look at sort of the corporate model as being an expression of our selfishness, it makes total sense. So when that changes, and we expect of the company which is ourself, our own company within, to do good, we wouldn't think of participating in a company outside our own life that also doesn't do good. So it's about everybody changing and everybody taking responsibility for feeding the birds and helping a person up the street who you see struggling, or saying a nice word to somebody weeping at the train station. It's not always about these big, enormous things that we have to do. We have a culture, a mythology of the hero that dominates our culture, and we think if you're not famous or rich or a football star or some sort of sports star or some sort of Hollywood or musician, you can't make a difference. And the truth is, just the littlest kindness is a profound change on the planet, because it's that kindness and that love that when we awaken that whole being body of love that's in all of us, when you awaken it in a neighbor, that neighbor can awaken it in another neighbor. And I don't mean that just metaphorically, I mean it literally. So it's like tag. We have a game of tag of good that we have to do now, and it's little things too. It doesn't have to be major. I'm not a nuclear scientist. I'm not going to be able to solve the problem at Fukushima or Calvert Cliffs or any other nuclear power plant on a fault line. And stupidly and unbelievably, that's how they've been built in this country. It's insane, but it's the truth, because they need the water. So we're all going to inherit all the decisions that have been made by all the people together and separately, because we are all one. And that's, I think, the bottom line of this time period of reality, of coming to appreciate. And I think the internet has helped us move tighter and closer and faster into this globalness that we affect each other. And every technology is really representing, in my opinion, a spiritual reality. So the internet and the cell phones, we're always calling on our cell phones. Our cells, our millions of cells in our body are always calling each other. You know, you step into somebody's space and within 2 feet of each other, our heart fields interact. And they're like 10,000 times stronger than the mind field. So it's not just about the awakening of love. It's about waking intelligent love and higher love that is not necessarily personal, but is compassionate. So this compassionate co-arising, or this dependent co-arising that the Buddhists talk about so beautifully, is taking place. It's happening. It's not happening. It's just some of us are impatient. I for one am a very impatient person, and am always shocked at how slow change really takes, how long it's taking. But the truth is that sometimes that push from behind, you know, it's amazing how a community comes together when there's a hurricane or a typhoon or, God forbid, things that take lives. And so all of us are just watching. Now I think the thing is the decisions that we make afterwards, like after there's a typhoon, why put billions of dollars back into an island nation that's going to be flooded ultimately within the next 100 to 200 years? I mean, that's the part that I don't get, because we're all so attached to where we live and our history and our country and this and that. But the truth is we're going to have billions of people migrating simultaneously as the waters rise. So it's smarter now to start addressing. And how is humanity going to live when we all go to higher land? Right.
Yeah, and a lot of the higher land, the reason people aren't there is because there's water shortages and different things like that. Yeah, I do see that we're, like, the internet is an outer manifestation of what's happening on an inner level, spiritually, consciously. And it seems like if you go back in time, Bruce Lipton and I have talked about this in depth, because it really aligns itself with biology. But if you go back in time, it appears like what happened is, as particles came together, they came together to form atoms. Atoms came together to form molecules, molecules to cells, and cells to organisms. Each time there's a platform made for consciousness to interact on a more complex level, whether it's an atomic level or a molecular level or a cellular level. And now we're here now as a planetary cellular level, human beings, and we're doing the same thing that every other level has done. Atoms, forming more.
Makes a lot of sense.
Now we're forming a complex planetary consciousness. And when that ignites, we'll wake up.
And what's so interesting to me is that it's always existed. You know, it's like I was listening to an interview my husband did recently with Dr. Stanley Krippner, and he's co-authored a book on Rolling Thunder's life. And they were talking about, or maybe it was somebody else, I don't know. They were talking about native smoke signals and how when the white man came he thought that they were actually communicating something with the smoke signals. And the truth is they were lighting the fire to tell the other chief, shaman, or whomever, pay attention, I'm sending you a message. It was a message to tune in.
Wow.
So I think that all of this that's going on in the world that's what it is. It's a message to tune in. It's a message to tune in to the land where you live, literally where you physically live, whether it's an apartment building or a home. It's a chance to tune in when you're driving at what's around you. It's a chance to tune in to what you're feeling and what you're saying and what you're thinking. It's a chance to tune in to what other people need. Ultimately, it's all about service. So we're in a big service ship, and we're going to be called to big service, and nobody gets out of it, and we're all connected. And as I joke with people, I said, like it or not, we're all tied in together. And it's a beautiful opportunity to become aware that if we can do a little bit each day in our mind, heart, and soul, and with our hands and our hearts for others, we'll change the world. And if each of us can pray for the waters of the earth and pray for people wherever there's disaster and we see it and it comes to our eyes, because anything we see in a given day is there for a reason. It's not just outside ourselves. It's a teacher. So we're all each other's teachers, and every event and everything we experience is a teacher. So every day we're given the code, and if we open our heart, I think we can find more of it, so that the decisions we make and the brilliance of our youth and the young kids who are coming in with just champions of hearts and souls, that they'll come up with solutions, because they'll be asking a different set of questions from a different state of being. And if we can create that field of a greater loving engagement, then we can elevate the consciousness that really will be able to handle the challenges, because we can handle what it is. It's just how do we respond is as important as what we're responding to.
You know what Barbara Marx Hubbard told me once? She said, that as we were doing the interview, she says, one of the important things about even doing this interview is the fact that as it goes up into YouTube, and I guess what Pierre Desjardins would call the noosphere, it's going into this collective grid of consciousness. So everything that we think, everything that we broadcast, everything that we do has an effect on that grid of consciousness. So I think we've done our part today.
Well, thank you for sharing the time with me. I really appreciate it.
Would you like to share some of your websites and what you and your husband are doing with your radio show?
Thank you. Yes, my husband and I co-host. We take turns every other week now with 21st Century Radio, which I think is the oldest on-air AM radio new paradigm show in the country, if not the world. We're almost in our 30th year. And it can be heard online if you're not in our East Coast area at www.21st21st centuryradio.com. That's 21st21st centuryradio.com. And all our shows are archived. They're free. You can make use of them in any way that's helpful to other people's growth. And then my own website is Zohara, Zohara online.com. That's Zohara, Zohara online.com. And I have my 3 different books, 2 in Kabbalah, now the new one, The Future of Human Experience, Visionary Thinkers on the Science of Consciousness. I'm a photographer and a gardener and a telepath, and so I do a lot with animals and nature in general, and it seems to keep me balanced enough to keep that hope machine happening. And anyway, thank you again, and may everybody find the passion to know that they're divine beings and that what you do is divine if we choose to make it that way.
You know, Zohara, whenever you do an interview like this, you're always telling people, oh, you're an amazing person. It was really nice having you on the show. But sincerely, it was really a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much. God bless.
All right. You take it easy.